Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. So, we're going to do something a little bit different today, though scripturally important, and I will reference scripture for you. We're going to talk about voting and actually how to vote. This presentation was put together years ago by Dr. Norman Geisler. I've made some adjustments to it, but basically it's pretty straightforward. So I know this is uncomfortable for a lot of Christians, the whole issue of voting and government, and are we getting into an area where we shouldn't be, keep the government separate and all this stuff. I think that is a little bit of a misunderstanding of things, not only scripturally, but also from an American point of view. But let's jump in. So this is the outline. We're going to face some upfront objections. We're going to talk about what a church cannot do, what a church can do, what a church should do. We're going to look at Paul, how he understood and used the Roman government and the laws of Rome, and also we'll just draw our conclusion at the end. So let's walk through this. First of all, let's face an upfront objection that may be the elephant in the room. We should not mix God and government, religion and politics, the moral and the political. So that would be the objection. The response is, why not? And I think, first of all, our founding fathers based government on God and encouraged both religion and morality. Now, we have moved pretty far away from the founding fathers at this point, but we need to realize that this was their goal and their aim, and how the government that we live under was established. Number two, why not? By encouraging Christians to vote their conscience, we are not establishing a national religion, which the Constitution forbids, but only encouraging religion in general, which the Constitution promotes, and morality in particular, which the courts have upheld. Though they haven't done a great job all the time, that's their goal in doing that. And why not? Good morals are the basis of good government, and without morality, civil government, it's not civil. Number one, the government without God is godless. That's obvious, right? Government without religion is irreligious and anti-religious, which is not a good thing. Now, it's also not a good thing for the government to be a denomination. That is not the goal. The goal, look, the bottom line is this. The goal is not to denominationalize the government, federal government, or state. The goal is to have, for the terms of dealing with the words that the founding fathers used, is we want religious people in government. Because religious people, they are moral people, or they are supposed to be. And when the founding fathers founded the country, they understood that as Judeo-Christian morality. So it came from the Old and the New Testament. But anyways, the government without morality is amoral or immoral. And we can look at Russia and China for that, or even more. You can go to North Korea, you can go to a number of places around at this point that, have no morality, and we see even some of the smaller European countries and everything, just the immorality that has really affected them in a very bad way. Look at Canada, though Canada is... they're not communists. They're definitely socialist, leaning that way, and they're run in a way that the people are not advantaged, and they do not have the freedoms that we have, though we are even losing our own freedoms. James Madison, the father of the U.S. Constitution, he said, before any man can be considered as a member of civil society, he must be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe. So, in other words, if you can't come under the governance of God in your own personal life, how can you govern others? It's interesting, David said that when he was talking about how the Holy Spirit was leading him to write at the end of 2 Samuel. And to paraphrase it, actually, I should probably look it up for you because, the quote is just so valuable. But 1 second. Hold on. He says in 2 Samuel 23:3 or 22:2, he starts out and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord spoke by me, and His word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, the Rock of Israel spoke to me. He that rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God." And really, that is what Madison is effectively echoing here, because until you are ruled, you can't properly rule. And this is the problem when you have people in government that have no concept of accountability to God. If you are not accountable to God and you see yourself as the highest level of authority personally, you become a dictator. And even within the system of governance that is set up within our constitutional republic, you can still have people that are ruining the system because they are not utilizing the system. They are manipulating the system. And so let's move on here. Number 2, our founding fathers do not hesitate to mix God and government. The Pilgrims did. Our first schools did. As a matter of fact, on my school website, if you go on there, it talks about some of the early documents, the advantage that they were for these early schools that were put together. The reason that they taught English mainly was so that people could read the Bible and know what it said. So we just have moved so far away from that. A lot of the problems that we have now have obscured the real issues and what our founding fathers had established in their desire for a government different than all the rest of the world had, because they saw what was out there, and that's why they established a republic. The Declaration of Independence did not hesitate to mix God and government. The Constitution did. The Supreme Court did. The state constitutions did. And, you go back to the Mayflower, and they had the Mayflower Compact. The Pilgrims did up under A here, right? The Mayflower Compact, they wrote for the advancement of the Christian faith. And it was in the name of King James, which they called the defender of the faith. So the point is that from our very founding and the original people that came here and stepped off on Plymouth Rock, which is not too far from here, and quite underwhelming for people that travel a long distance to see it because it's just a rock. But when they came, their intention was the promotion of the gospel and the advancing of Christianity. So they've also promoted religion in schools, in the early schools, right? In the Northwest Ordinance, they declared religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. Schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. And again, they saw it all as connecting together. we've been convinced at this point that we need to remove God out of every aspect of government and education because somehow that will advance our knowledge. Well, take a look. After prayer and Bible reading were taken out in the 60s, when I was a little kid in grammar school, all the education levels plummeted almost overnight. You chart this stuff and you realize that we have not improved. We are not advancing. We are retreating educationally. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence, government is grounded in, quote, the laws of nature and nature's God. Thus, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the government does not give rights. The government secures rights. Rights are given by God because the Founding Fathers understood properly that when God created people, He created them with rights that He gives. He gave life, He gave freedom, and we can pursue a happy life, in their terms, in moving forward. But that's not because the government gives them to us. It's because the government is supposed to protect and secure them. Go to the communist countries and the socialist countries and look at them and see what has happened, that the rights of those people have actually been removed. They're not been protected, so they're not secured, and the government takes them as though it was theirs to give. But the government can't give you life, right? So we move on. The religious-based colleges had established them. Now, Harvard, which again is not far from us here, originally they were really designed more as a seminary. And the rules for their students was to consider, well, the main end of his life and study is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. Now, that was in 1636, many, many moons ago. You look at Harvard now, and it's not even the same institution at all. I mean, you can't get more out of phase with this statement here with its founding. It's 180 degrees out. If this is right side up, Harvard is now upside down. There are school-sponsored Bible readings. In 1844, this is from a court case where they were trying to actually remove aspects of Bible and all out of schools. But the question was asked, why may not the Bible, and especially the New Testament, be read and taught as divine revelation in schools? That was the question. You can look it up yourself in this 1844 verdict, Vidal versus Garand. So this was a Supreme Court ruling, and that question came from the Supreme Court. Also, they have upheld, though they have made many errors over the years, they really had no business enacting Roe versus Wade. However, now that it's been repealed, which is a good thing, but including laws, the Supreme Court has upheld laws against murder, rape, theft, polygamy, incest, adultery, homosexuality, and Roe versus Wade. So now, it doesn't mean that these things are not happening in the country, but that's because people are not following or enforcing the laws, but that doesn't mean the laws are not there. Many states still have, which almost every state originally had, laws against homosexuality. But that doesn't really matter anymore because people just ignore all the laws, as well as those that are supposed to uphold and prosecute them. Number three, by promoting good government, we are not establishing religion, but morality. And this is important, the distinction, though morality is part of a religious viewpoint, the government, good government, is not establishing religion, it's establishing morality. The Constitution only forbids establishing a national religion, not a national morality. Look, when the law says you can't murder your neighbor, that's a moral law. All laws are moral. All laws will tell you that one behavior is okay and the other one is not okay. This behavior is acceptable and this isn't. This behavior is legal. This behavior isn't legal. And based on whatever law that is, it is making a distinction between a moral right and a moral wrong. You're wrong if you behave like this. You're right if you behave like this. You'll be cited in violation of the law if you behave this way. You won't be cited if you behave the other way. So when we're dealing with morality, all laws establish some form of morality. All laws establish morality. The only question is whose morality will be established. That's really where we end up. Is it going to be the morality that is given to us by God and that is in everybody's conscience, that everybody understands, even people that don't acknowledge God or believe in God? Or are we going to allow someone's preference to be the morality? See, that's the issue. You know, you can have an atheist determine that this behavior is acceptable and this isn't, but that's just their opinion because they have no grounding of the basis for or the justification for their moral viewpoint other than themselves, because in their view, there's nothing beyond them. There's no God, nothing transcends them, so the only thing that they can reference is themselves. And then that means it's only an opinion. It's not a law. Now, would you like to live in a country without laws against murder, theft, rape, child and spouse abuse, assault, etc.? No. Who wants to do that? Do you want to live in a neighborhood where everybody thinks it's okay to rob and murder your neighbor? No, that's insanity. Though so many people, they want to live without any restraint, and they don't want the laws to be there to restrain them. That's called anarchy. No society can function in anarchy. Look at the blue cities that didn't prosecute robbery and larceny and the destruction of private property. You had major companies that were retailers move out. They had to move out because there was no protection that they had. The law wasn't protecting them, so they said, we cannot afford to be here anymore because people come in, they take all the stuff out of the store, and they're not prosecuted. So they left. It's the only thing they can do because it's like having a city where there's no police. Nobody can function in that environment. It's not safe, and it's not just. I don't know why people can't really grasp this, but those are just some realities. Now, we can legislate morality. This is a book by Frank Turek and Norman Geisler called Legislating Morality. The questions they ask in the book is it wise? Is it legal? Is it possible? And yes to each one of those. Yes, it is wise, it is legal, and it is possible to legislate morality because every law legislates someone's moral viewpoint. We just want to get God's moral viewpoint in there because it transcends everybody else's. And it's for everybody's good. The First Amendment does not forbid establishing a national morality. Congress, in other words, the federal government, shall make no law concerning the establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So people can observe their religious beliefs as long as they don't violate the laws. Note Congress established a national morality by basing its law on the Ten Commandments, which they don't like to have around, apparently. It's amazing because I think that all of the Ten Commandments, I mean, probably not the Sabbath day, but the other 9 commandments, I don't have any issue with them. I don't want my neighbors stealing from me, lying, coveting my wife or my goods, and wanting to murder me and all that. This is crazy. Like, who would want to live with a neighbor like that? I certainly wouldn't. Our government encouraged religion by first, the First Amendment's free exercise. Second, promoting religion in schools. 3, presidential prayer proclamations. If you remember the past, we haven't had many presidents since Reagan. Maybe the younger George Bush a little bit, and and Donald Trump. Other than that, the other ones weren't interested in any kind of prayer proclamation. There's been congressional prayers, school-sponsored prayers, government-supported missionaries, government based on belief in God. These are all encouraged by our government over time. Religious-based colleges, school-sponsored Bible reading, and like I said, the Supreme Court has upheld moral laws. The government supported missionaries. In 1796, under President Washington, Congress gave land to the United Brethren for the purpose of, quote, proclaiming the gospel among the heathen. In 1803, Congress granted money signed by President Jefferson for a church to do missionary work among the Kaskaskian Indian, which is in the North Midwest, the middle of the, around Illinois or Ohio, if I remember correctly. All federal and state laws establish someone's moral views. That's the bottom line. If the establishing of laws are not influenced by people who understand God's morality, they will be immoral laws. I mean, what are we looking at today? Hello. Immoral laws hurt people. They impose unjust burdens on innocent people. That's what we're seeing today. The Founding Fathers established the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the amendments based on biblical morality, nothing else. If we do not vote to maintain moral laws, we will be living under immoral laws. That is why it's so important to vote. Objection to voting, right? Some people say, well, there is corruption on both sides of the aisle. Well, in response to that, most choices in life involve less than perfect alternatives. But there is an alternative, and there is a distinction. We'll talk about it. Don't sacrifice the good because you can't achieve the perfect. If you needed 3 policemen but could only get 2, would you refuse to call the police? No, I think you'd call anyway. Now, it's less than perfect, but you know what? I'd rather have 2 than none, especially if I needed policemen. There is corruption in all levels of politics, but we can influence it toward less corruption by our vote. That's the whole point. A lesson from the past for us. The church avoided politics and watched the courts remove prayer and Bible reading from public schools. Not a good time. Public education deteriorated exponentially to hedonistic immorality through political policy. How else do you think that it happened? It happened through politics. It didn't just happen. People had to change existing laws and then decide not to prosecute old laws. Well, that happens through political posturing and pressure, and people bringing in new laws. Look, I live in Massachusetts. Very, very liberal lawmakers, and the laws that they go out of their way to enact are absurd. They're ridiculous. Um, you know, well, I don't want to digress into it, but let's just put it this way: they're not helpful. Every law that they seem to come out with, and wear as a badge of honor, oppresses people and deteriorates the quality of their life. So, believe me, I've been living it for 66, almost 67 years. Christians get out of public education to avoid the secular difficulties. They stop getting involved in, positions on school boards and everything else, and they just basically handed it over. Now, public education that many Christians must send their children to is immoral. Some people don't have the option of either sending their kids to a good Christian school. Look, I thank God we got a great Christian school in our church. Calvary Chapel Academy does a phenomenal job. But, not everybody can go there. Not every family can afford private education. So a lot of families have their children in public education, and it is awful. Especially in this state, it's terrible. So, look, we're at a turning point in our country. The question is it wise to leave all the decisions to the ungodly to govern us and make our laws? And I say it like that, and I ask the question like that because that's the type of governance that I've lived under here in this state for next month will be 67 years, short of being in the military for a few years. So, believe me, I know firsthand, and I'm seeing it through the federal government at this point. John Adams said this: "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other, because they have no concept of the position of the fathers, the founding fathers, that they understood that they were under God's governance." And if people do not have that perspective, they will not even understand much of the principles behind the Constitution and the laws established with them. Christians can influence a nation. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14:34. Now, we have an opportunity to influence the righteousness in our country, right? Most countries in the world do not give their people the opportunity to vote in their leaders the way we have an opportunity to do that. God has given Christians an opportunity to help vote in a government that will help the spreading of the gospel by upholding social peace and morality. I'm not saying that the government will spread the gospel, but it establishes a society that is peaceful so the gospel can be promoted. Paul said in 1 Timothy 2, "I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority." Why? Because we need to pray for them so that we can what? That we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. That's why. Because otherwise, if you have immoral people and wicked people that are ruling, then you will not have peace and you will not have any godliness exercised anywhere. And once that happens, you're just dealing with anarchy, and you cannot establish anything in a planned way or in a peaceful way with any amount of success to get the gospel out. So that's the background. Let's look at what a church cannot do. A church cannot endorse political candidates. Now, Donald Trump had changed that a bit, but it's gone back. But either way, you know, typically churches cannot endorse candidates. In other words, they're not part of the political system. They cannot contribute to political candidates, and nor should churches be doing that, because the money that's given to churches is given for God's work and the work of the gospel. And the people, if they want to give money individually to endorse candidates, that's fine. But as far as the church itself, that's not the design of the church. The church cannot contribute to political groups similarly, right? Can't grant their name to support political groups or candidates. In other words, the church's role in politics is not to be part of the political system as an entity, because the church's mission in the world is different. The church's mission is not to be part of the government, but the church's mission is to preach the gospel. But the government that they live under can affect their ability to do that, and to also just to meet, right? The church cannot allow one candidate, but not others, the use of its facilities. In other words, it's not a matter of picking one candidate and then saying you can have use of the facility but you can't, and all that. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have a political candidate in a church. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you had multiple candidates in the same party that were running for office, it's not the church's role to get involved in being part of the political machine, though it is the church's role, and we'll get into that. So the church can support political issues, but not political candidates. That's the distinction that we're making here. So here's what the church can do, right? It can sponsor voter registration. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have voter registration in your church. In some areas, that may be a very helpful thing. But there are other ways to sponsor or get people registered to vote. And if people need help, maybe a church can have some folks helping them out or whatever. But you got to get people registered to vote. A church can discuss moral and social issues. Now, we have done that in the past from the pulpit, and at times, and we're just dealing with the morality of these things, and people leave because once in a while you get somebody who says, "Oh, that sounds like it's too political," and they leave. Well, they don't understand the Bible, and they also don't understand American politics to take on that position, thinking it's an issue. The church can distribute candidate surveys, and we also get things in here that show you how candidates will vote on certain, and what their opinions are on certain moral and social issues. The church can introduce candidates at church. They can educate members on views of candidates, which is what I was just saying. They can have candidates preach or read scripture, as long as it's not a political campaign. Sponsor petitions on legislation. We've done that. We've lined up the tables with different, legislative efforts to try to sponsor moral laws. The church can lobby candidates on legislation and encourage members to vote morally, obviously. And there's a lot of things that people that are in churches can do. And there are certain things that the church can do in trying to motivate and point people in the right direction. But like the previous slide talked about on what the church can't do, the church isn't, the church is not part of one political candidate's, staff, basically. Now, here's what the church should do. sponsor voter registration if people need that assistance, right? Make members aware of the issues and views of the candidates at a minimum. Encourage the people to vote, and encourage the people to vote according to the Christian principles, which is biblical morality. I can't tell you how many Christians I've talked to over the years that will vote for candidates that are promoting the most ungodly, sinful, immoral legislation. I don't get it, I really don't. It's like inviting somebody into the neighborhood that's a murderer. I don't know. So we should encourage our members to vote for, right, in church, keeping under God and the pledge, which they keep trying to remove, reading the Ten Commandments in school, which there's nothing wrong with, teaching creation in school. I don't know if we'll ever get back to that, but there's a fight just to teach intelligent design, which is not creation. It's just saying that, Darwinism, that is mindless evolution, effectively, the development, is not possible. It's not possible. And there's obviously intelligence behind what exists because of the, and we've gone through this in the past in the apologetics videos, because of the design and the masterful design and complexity and the DNA and everything else. So they are stealing from kids, and they are uneducating them because creation cannot be taught alongside of evolution. Hey, listen, I'm all for putting creation next to evolution because, and let kids decide for themselves, because once you actually see the scientific facts, they'll all abandon evolution, and that's what the evolutionists are afraid of. Having class prayer in school, we should be voting for that. Teaching God-given morals in school. And by the way, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember the state. Just this past week, the governor in one of the middle states signed into law that in school, if a kid asks about intelligent design, the teacher can answer them. They can't teach intelligent design, but they can have a discussion on it if a student brings it up. It's like, wow, you'd think that you're changing the world. Now, is that a step I'm thankful for? Absolutely. But isn't it amazing? Like, the kid has to ask the question, and all this stuff. It's nonsense. It really is. We should encourage people to vote for supporting civil rights for all citizens. Look, the Black Lives Matter movement was a communist Marxist movement. It deceived a lot of people. It had evil intentions. It basically divided races. It pushed for skin color over anything else as a means of superiority or advantage or disadvantage or whatever, and that's ridiculous. That's like saying if you were born with blue eyes that you should have less advantage. Well, that's ridiculous. You can't help with what color your eyes are. Well, you can't help with what color your skin is either. We should be blind to skin color and just treat people as people. All lives matter, not just Black lives. There's all kinds of lives that matter. Every life matters. So, to advance the woke idea that somehow skin color makes you a good or a bad person it's not only ignorant, it's stupid, and it's wrong, quite frankly. And it's evil. Appointing good judges who will correctly interpret the Constitution. Amen to that. We got a Supreme Court judge that doesn't know what a woman is. If I was on the congressional committee asking her questions, she was there because Joe Biden said he wanted to have a black woman appointed to the Supreme Court. Now, I would have asked her when she said she couldn't tell you what a woman was, I would have asked her if she had men or women's clothes on and where she bought them. And did she know if she was a woman or not? Because if she couldn't answer those basic questions, then should she actually be assigned a role of determining what laws are constitutional and what aren't? Are you kidding me? A kid in grade school could figure that out. But she couldn't answer the question. I would have asked her if she knew she was black. And if she couldn't tell she was a woman, then maybe she wasn't one of Joe Biden's candidates, because if she didn't know what a woman was, and her obviously being a woman, well, we don't know what she is. And Joe is looking for a black woman to be on the Supreme Court. And maybe she's not a woman. Who knows, right? You see how crazy this is? Once the truth is unfixed from what is reality, it can go anywhere, and it can be anything. Stuff is crazy. We should vote for maintaining a strong national security. Otherwise, we won't, the reason you lock your doors at night is the same reason you should have a strong military protecting a country. It's also why you should have the doors locked on the border, which is a whole nother issue. You should vote for supporting pro-life and pro-family issues, because if you don't have families, you don't have a society. You should vote to support all the amendments of the Constitution. In brief, restoring our lost freedoms, because a lot of these, unfortunately, have been lost, and we need to get them back. Now, Paul understood and used the Roman government. He had an understanding of Roman law. In Acts 13, Paul preached the gospel to the proconsul Sergius Paulus, the Roman administrative officer of the island he was on. He was interested in the gospel, and Paul didn't let a sorcerer closely associated with him to prevent the gospel from being preached. This is an advantage when a government official gets saved. Paul understood that. Now, he didn't just say, oh, well, this assistant to the proconsul doesn't want me to share the gospel with him, so I'll just go away and not make waves. No, he actually casted blindness on this guy Bar Jesus, and when the proconsul saw that, he believed. I think that was good motivation. He realized that God was there doing some work. Proverbs 29:2, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when a wicked man rules, the people groan. Oh my goodness, that is so true, and we have watched it. And but Paul understood that, which is why he wanted to make sure he shared the gospel with this political leader. It was later that Paul healed Publius's father, the leading citizen, in other words, meaning Roman governor on the island of Malta. That was at the end of the book of Acts, which caused others to seek him out that were sick, implying the gospel was promoted because of the miraculous event. So God got Paul to the island, and through the power of God and God healing this guy that was basically the political leader on the island, the gospel is enabled to be spread. This is what affecting political leadership can do. Paul used the Roman law. In Acts 16, Paul was in Philippi with Silas preaching the gospel. Most of you know the story. He eventually cast the demon out of a girl fortune-telling for local businessmen, which ruined their business. This resulted in a riot and landed Paul and Silas in jail after being unjustly beaten by the governing officials against Roman law. Paul was a Roman citizen. He could not be beaten without being condemned, and they had not even determined what he had done. They just responded to the crowd. God sent an earthquake and freed them when they were in jail, but they did not leave, knowing that the jailer would be harmed. The guy was going to kill himself. He knew that if he lost all his prisoners, that it was curtains for him. After sharing the gospel with the jailer and his family and them receiving Christ, they attended to Paul and Silas's wounds. Now, when it was time to release Paul and Silas, the magistrates wanted to have them leave town quietly. They wanted to kind of usher them out the back door. Paul refused and demanded a public acquittal of the charges. Not only did the governing authorities unjustly beat a Roman citizen, talking about Paul, against their law, but were trying to avoid the recognition of a public apology for the way Paul and Silas were treated. Now, they were afraid. There was a Roman province, Philippi. They were probably nervous that they would get in trouble with Rome, but that wasn't the issue, okay? Paul's demand for a public acquittal masterfully used Roman law to the advantage of the fledgling church that began in Philippi at Lydia's house. If Paul and his team were seen as an immoral group that caused trouble to the town, the new church would have no advantage to share the gospel because the townspeople would always see them as a criminal threat. Paul, knowing this, used the law legally to advantage the church to help advance the gospel. Now, I've read commentaries where they say, oh, Paul was so little here. Why did he need to feel like he got his pound of flesh? Oh, my gosh. Again, how foolish can people be? That wasn't the issue. The issue was that Paul was using this as an advantage for the new church at Philippi so that the townspeople would realize that they were not guilty. They were not thrown in jail because they were actually guilty of anything. That the political leaders, the magistrates, they were wrong, not Paul and Silas, so that the gospel message would not be hindered by people thinking that these were a bunch of troublemakers, effectively. Now, in Acts 21, later on, Paul's visit to Jerusalem also resulted in a riot and arrest when Paul mentioned to the Jews, when he was on the steps of the Antonia fortress, that God sent him to the Gentiles to preach the gospel. He was beaten unlawfully, again, because they took him. They didn't know why the Jews were starting to riot, because Paul was speaking to them in Hebrew, but the Roman centurion was in charge of trying to get Paul into the Antonia fortress to keep him safe. They started beating Paul again without finding out what the issue was. They just assumed that he had done something wrong. But he was a Roman citizen, which he called attention to and was then kept in custody because the officials did not know what to do with him at that point. He was innocent but beaten as a criminal unjustly. So they didn't know what to do. They couldn't put him outside because the Jews would have killed him. So they had to kind of protect him, but yet Rome had done wrong to him. So they were kind of unsure what to do with him. So while Paul was held at the Antonia fortress, there was a plan discovered to kill Paul by a group of Jews, so the Roman commander decided to move Paul to Caesarea where he would be safer. This made Paul a political pawn, the Romans not knowing how to release him, having done wrong to him, but needing to protect him at the same time. He was held before Felix down there for 2 years. Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, right, being the new governor, and wanting to curry favor with the ruling Jews, he intended to turn Paul over to them to solve the political situation using the local political Jewish figures. In other words, he figured, hey, look, he didn't violate Roman law. He only kind of violated something with the Jews' law. We'll let them figure it out. We'll let them manage it. This was not to Paul's advantage or safety. In other words, they would have killed Paul. So first, he was not guilty of violating any Roman laws, but was unjustly beaten and kept in jail for over 2 years through no fault of his own. That's number one. Number two, second, turning Paul over to the Jews would mean certain death for him. So Paul utilized the Roman law, which he understood, and appealed to Caesar, which then the Roman governor was obligated to accommodate. From this point in the book of Acts, Luke follows the events of Paul leading to his arrival in Rome to get his audience before Caesar, again, using the laws of Rome to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ, not only along the way, but again, Paul feeling that, hey, if you could get Caesar converted, it could have a large effect. So Paul may not have had the opportunity American citizens do to vote, but his knowledge and use of Roman law tells us that if he had the opportunity, he most likely would have voted in contributing to the morality of Roman rule. Hey, listen, Paul was not an idiot. He knew law. He knew Roman law. He was a Roman citizen, even though, he was a Pharisee. He was a Jew. He knew the Old Testament. So Paul was well educated and well rounded in his understanding. If there were not good Roman laws for Paul to utilize, think about it. He would have been killed by the Jews and his ministry ended early. Each law that Paul utilized to further the gospel were moral laws established within the Roman government's legal system for the protection of Roman citizens. It says, in due time, Paul wrote in Galatians 4, Christ was born under the law, through a virgin. So it was the perfect time because Roman law was, we got a lot of our laws from Rome, the good ones, but Roman law was pretty extensive, and it was an advantage that God knew that Paul would need as he moved out among the Gentiles to preach the gospel. Rome had a very detailed legal system that people ignored over time, which resulted in their fall as a nation. In other words, they became an immoral people violating moral laws and imploding their nation. Ancient Rome had a form of voting by free male citizens, but was ruled by Caesar. So it's not really a free voting situation like we have, but they had some people had opportunity to vote. Now, freedoms we have lost. So in principle, the first 6 and then 7 to 9 in practice. Freedom to teach creation in public schools, we've lost that. Freedom to teach God-given morals in public schools. Freedom of class prayer in public schools. Freedom of class Bible reading in public schools. Freedom of due process for the unborn. They are killed without any options. Freedom of life for the unborn. If you don't have life, you can't have liberty. You can't have any freedoms. And then in practice, freedom of expression in the mainstream press. The press is controlled, unfortunately, by the left-leaning folks in the country. Freedom from taxation without representation. We are taxed. Hey, listen, I know what taxing is. I live in Taxachusetts. You talk about without representation, it's ridiculous. Freedom to teach the Declaration of Independence. Look, a vote to restore these freedoms is a vote to restore our constitutional rights. We need to vote. Every person that doesn't vote puts their freedoms in the hands of people they don't know and may be immoral, and could very easily be. But what about the economy? We should vote morals over money. The best thing you can do for the economy is to vote morality. Good morality promotes good economy. Seek God and you'll find gold. You may, right? But seek gold and you will lose God. Can't serve God and money. Vote life over non-life issue. The right to life is the right to all other rights. Without life, you have no rights. Dead people have no rights. Hitler had a great plan for the economy, so you can't just go on that alone. We should vote the party with moral policies. Now, we're not saying that one party is going to be entirely biblical and the other one of the devil, but obviously one party is going to be much more aligned with the Bible than the other party. This is on the Jefferson Memorial. God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? If you do not have any idea or concept or accountability to God, then you will be your own God. Dangerous people like that. Edmund Burke, he said, the only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. All you need to do nothing is don't register, don't vote Christian morality, and promote the prevailing of evil. That's what it's going to be. our Constitution, we need to protect the Constitution, which protects our freedoms. Immoral and anti-American politicians are trying to remove this document as the foundation of our republic. If they succeed, it will be through a failure to act through our current freedom to vote. If you're going to vote people into office that have no respect for the Constitution secures your rights. It doesn't give them to you, but it secures them. If nothing secures your rights, you have no rights, and the government will treat you any way they want. But if you do nothing, then don't complain, right? If we lose our freedoms, if America is judged by God because of it, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. So that will be our plight if that's the way we go. Some people say my vote does not count. Yes, it does. If everyone followed that, then no one would vote. President Kennedy won by an average of 1 vote per precinct. Bush won by less than that. Remember the charts, right? In 2020, 40% of Christians did not vote, which according to the 2019 Pew Research, there were 167 million Christians. 40% of that number is 66.8 million Christians that did not vote. That number could easily determine an election. Easily. Half that. Think about these numbers. It's unbelievable. The Christian vote counts. Jesus commanded Christians to love others, right? That includes enemies as well as other believers. Immoral political policies hurt people, mainly those most vulnerable in need of help. So if you want to help people, you need to put people into government that will not hurt those people, okay? Over the past 4 years, more people have been hurt by the highest inflation in over 50 years. The open border has resulted in the highest annual fentanyl deaths recorded. How is that helping people? These are 2 basic issues, never mind abortion and everything else. 66 million Christians voting could change the misery many thousands of, probably more than that, hundreds of thousands of people face. The Bible teaches us to help, not hurt people. To him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. James 4:17. If we know the right thing is to vote, and please do not write Jesus in on the ballot. I've heard more than one person say that they're going to just write in Jesus. Listen, Jesus is the king. He is the king of the universe. All power, dominion, and authority are his. He doesn't get voted in. That is an insult and a dishonor to him. He's not voted in. He avoided being voted in John chapter 6. Go read it. Jesus is the king, and he will eventually bring the kingdom to this planet. He is never going to be voted in. He has it by the authority and the position based on what he has done. And his position as God, he is the living, reigning king that will bring that governance to this planet. Do not vote him. Do not write his name in. It's an insult to him, and it's a misunderstanding to the people that may read it, and it's a poor witness. He is never going to get voted into office. His position has nothing to do with voting. All right? Now, a biblical command here, right, from James. The Old Testament stated it, right? In Proverbs 3:27, it says, "Do not hold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in the power of your hand to do so." If it's in the power of your hand to vote and you don't vote, you're withholding good from people that you could help by putting better people into government. The Old Testament stated it. The law demanded it. In Leviticus 19:13, it says, "You shall not cheat your neighbor nor rob him. The wages of him who is hired shall not remain with you all night until morning." In other words, because you have the power to pay them, you need to pay them that day. They didn't get paid, weekly, bi-monthly, or bi-weekly and monthly and all that. They didn't do that. They had to get paid their day's wages. There wasn't banks, and they couldn't go write a check or use a credit card. They needed what they got for their wages so they could buy the food for their family and have dinner and everything else. And even though a person was going to pay them, if they had the money and didn't pay them, they knew to do good by paying them, but they didn't do it, and that's a sin. And it's, quite frankly, I think it's no different with voting. Jesus commanded it in the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. You can read it. At the end of the parable, knowing the obligation to do good when in our power to, commanded his disciples to go and do likewise. Should we not obey Jesus? I mean, this is where we get to in this. Now, people think, well, like even in my state, I can easily say, well, what's the sense of me voting? Because, it's always Democrats, and I do not vote in Democrats, or I do not try to because of their policies. But if I vote Republican, I can easily say, well, what's the sense in voting? Because my vote won't have any effect in my state. It may or may not, but historically it hasn't. But that's not the point. God knows when I'm voting. I'm voting because of my obligation as a Christian and as a citizen in the country being a Christian. So I think we need to understand and have the right perspective here. There are 9 reasons we need to vote, right? Now, keep liberal judges in the minority because they vote contrary to the Constitution. So these 3 judges with the arrows over their heads, they are liberal, and they always take a liberal stand. And when there's a constitutional issue, they can't seem to figure out what the Constitution actually says. As difficult as one would seem to think, because the Constitution is pretty clear. More conservative SCOTUS judges saves lives, right? Roe versus Wade, that reversal saved lives. This is the direct result of President Donald Trump putting 3 conservative judges on the Supreme Court. Had a tremendous effect. Red states have been able to limit baby murder. So because of this, they pushed the control of the abortion issue back down to the states, which was the right thing to do. But what's interesting now that we see this playing out, the red states are trying to limit it. The obvious question is why red states want to limit abortion and blue states increase it. Like why would they want to do that? What is the goal of killing all these babies? It just amazes me that people can't see it. And, it's these women that are saying, my body, my right, but the baby is not their body. And I think that we should have equal rights for unborn women, don't you? Why should the age of the woman matter? Shouldn't the women in the womb have equal rights? I think so. Christians can continue to save the lives of babies by their vote, now that states have the ability to affect abortion. Why do 6.8 million Christians not vote to do good to others that are the most vulnerable in the womb? I think we need to really consider that. Christians will give an account, right? We stand before the bema seat, the judgment seat of Christ, alone. Paul said, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Now, it's not spiritual to refrain from voting. Now, just so we understand, the bema seat, the judgment seat, is the seat where rewards are given. So your sins are judged at the cross, but your rewards are judged based on how you live. And to refrain from voting, I've heard churches do this like they think it's spiritual. It's not spiritual. It's dumb, quite frankly, and it's ignorant. Politics establishes both the police and fire departments. Is it unspiritual to call 911? I bet you call them, you know. Politics determines how nations rule over people. What Christian wants to move to North Korea and live under a communist regime with, it should be no freedom, and is hostile to Christianity and shuts down the gospel? You want to live in a place like that? I don't. I don't want this place to become like that either. So, look, this is the battle hymn of the Republic. Notice the middle phrase in blue: as he died to make men holy, let us live to make men free. We do that by voting. We need to vote. In conclusion, you need to register if you are not registered. You need to vote if you haven't voted in the past, or if you are just coming of age and this is going to be your first time voting and you're a Christian, you vote. Biblical morality. You do not have to worry about the candidates. You are voting for the party and the policies of that party that will be brought in. This is not a dictatorship, so it's not like the individual president is just going to do everything he wants to do without, with no limits on power. The whole government is designed to balance out power, right? The executive, legislative, and judicial branch are designed so that no one branch has all the absolute power, okay? You should learn that in school, but my point in saying that is that so many people look at the candidates and they get hung up on people's personalities and everything, or they don't like something about them or whatever. Hey, I've heard people say, well, I don't want to vote for Donald Trump because, he's claiming to be a Christian and doesn't seem to live like a Christian. There's a lot of people that claim to be Christians that don't live like Christians. That's not your issue. You're not voting for a pastor. You're voting for a president. And you're not just voting for a president. You're voting to put a political party in the White House that will advance their party policies. That's what you're voting for. Party policies, not the individual and their personality. We really need to get by that because it stumbles too many people because they don't realize it. There you go. You need to vote the party that supports a more biblical morality. You need to influence others to do the same. You need to pray that God will have mercy on our country, for our country is immoral. Look at what we're doing as a country. So, look, I hope that this has given you some pause or food for thought. I hope that you will all vote. I hope that you will try to influence your friends, especially Christians, to vote and to vote for the party that is aligning closer with their policies to biblical morality. Now, to me, it's very simple. Look, the Democrats want to kill babies. The Republicans don't. That kind of seals the deal for me. But as you get down the line, all the other policies, they're like exact opposite. But anyways, you need to do that. If you're a Christian, you'll stand before God and give an account to whether you just turned a blind eye or at least took the time to register and vote. So we need to try to do what we can so that we can at least keep whatever freedoms that we have, because they are going away more rapidly than I would have thought that they ever could. But listen, until next time, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word.